First, we will review graphing square root functions. So if we look at number 1, y equals 2 square root x, we notice that there's nothing inside with the square root. Therefore, we can plug in the numbers that are easy to take square roots of that we worked on in class. So when we make our table, we want to plug in the numbers 0, 1, 4, and 9. Remember that you want to take the square root of the number first and then multiply it by 2. So the square root of 0 is 0. 0 times 2 is 0. The square root of 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of, the square root of 9 is 3, and 3 times 2 is 6. When we graph it, we want to put 1 through 9 on the x-axis and up to 6 on the y. We have our first point at 0, 0, our second point at 1, 2, our next point at 4, 4, and our last point at 9, 6. Remember that when you graph a square root function, it is curvy and we only have one arrow. We are going to need to label the domain and range on the quiz, and I forgot to put that on the review. So the domain for this function is x is greater than or equal to 0. And the range is y is greater than or equal to 0. You can see that our x's start at 0 and go up, and our y's start at 0 and go up. Let's take a look at the next problem. Y equals the square root of x minus 4. This graph does have a number inside the square root. So we need to be careful about what numbers we plug in for x. We want to plug numbers in, so after we subtract 4 from those numbers, we get numbers that are easy to take square roots of. So the first number I'm going to plug in is a 4. That's because the square root of 4 minus 4 is the same as the square root of 0, which equals 0. The next number I'm going to plug in is 5. The square root of 5 minus 4 is the same as the square root of 1, which is 1. The next number I'm going to plug in is 8. The square root of 8 minus 4 is the same as the square root of 4, which is 2. And the last number I'm going to plug in is a 13. The square root of 13 minus 4 is the square root of 9, which is 3. So when I graph this square root graph, my x-axis has to go all the way to 13. And my y needs to only go up to 3. My first point is at 4, 0. My next point is at 5, 1, 8, 2, and finally 13, 3. Can you come up with the domain and range for this graph? If you came up with x is greater than or equal to 4 for the domain, you're correct. And y is greater than or equal to 0 for the range is also correct. For the next problem, we have y equals negative square root x minus 1 plus 3. So again, we have a number inside with the square root, so we need to be careful about what numbers we plug in. And we also have this plus 3 that's on the outside. That's going to be added in later. So the first number I'm going to plug in is 1. The square root of 1 minus 1 is the same as taking the square root of 0. So first we want to take the square root of 0, multiply it by the negative, which is still 0, add 3. So my answer is 3. The next number I'm going to plug in is 2. If I plug in a 2, it's going to be the same as taking the square root of 1. The square root of 1 is 1. Then we need to multiply it by a negative. So we end up with negative 1 plus 3, which is 2. The next number I'm going to plug in is 5. If I plug in a 5, I'm going to be taking the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2 times a negative is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. The final number I'm going to plug in to get a 9 is a 10. So the square root of 9 is 3 times a negative. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. So now let's scroll over and make our graph. My x-axis needs to go to 10, and my y-axis needs to go to 3. My first point starts at 1, 3. My second point is at 2, 2. Third point is at 5, 1. And my last point is at 10, 0. So since we started this graph at 1, 3, that's our starting point, and our graph is going down from there. Do you know why this graph is going down instead of going up? If you said because of the negative out in front, you are correct. Let's do the domain and the range of this graph. So for my x values, they start at 1 and go up. So we have x is greater than or equal to 1. My y values start at 3 and they go down. So y is less than or equal to 3.